Morning, guys. Lovely day out there. Lovely day. Not working, not down on the beach, but sitting here talking to you guys. Sun creeping over my head there. Today I want to talk about thinking. Now, thinking's a fairly odd thing, and you might think to yourself, well, why would you want to talk about that in this current emergency? Well, the reason I want to talk about it is very, very few of us do it. It's just a fact of life. People don't think about things, they just react to things. I want to talk about it because I want to try and explain what I think is going to happen next and where we need to go to try and get some sense into this situation. As you know, I've been well ahead of the curve here about where the markets are going, what they're going to do and why. That is not hard to do if you happen to be versed in financial things. I worked on the markets for 20 years. It's pretty damn obvious what was happening. What's interesting is what's going to happen, and that's where you need to think about what's going to happen, because thinking and reacting are very, very different things. When we were at school, or when I was at school, I used to get hit a lot with sticks because I did not want to think like you. Nothing personal against you, half of you I don't even know, and I never did, but I did not want to think like everyone else. I just wanted to think like me. I didn't want to be judged by the fact that I couldn't remember what this formula was or that formula, or what this date was or that date was. That to me wasn't what thinking was about. Thinking was about just seeing things and understanding them. Now that has stood me in really good stead as I've got older, because actually what I tend to do in life is I think about possibilities. What could happen? I don't need to know what did happen. I don't need to be able to be judged by can I remember what date the congressional document was signed, or what is the molecular weight of so and so and so and so. I can look all that stuff up. What I tend to do is I spend my time thinking about what might happen rather than trying to remember and memorize irrelevant data. That makes me an interesting person to be around, because I'm not thinking the way that you're thinking, but if you give me a day or two, you'll be thinking the way I'm thinking, and you'll think you thought of it before I did. That's just how it works. Now, I'm going to say something to you about what's going to happen next week, so that you, next week, can think that you have thought of this, and then you'll feel better about yourself. What we've been watching, obviously, is a collapse of the stock markets and global economy, as we are facing a growing real threat. Okay. Let me just take this jumper off, it's a bit too hot. There are obvious reasons for that. Virus comes out of China and infects everyone. Now, if I watch President Trump and the White House conferences, etc., and I've been watching them now since all of last week. Start of the week, Trump comes on there looking like Ali G with the old big USA hat on, and Mike Pence looking like some sort of arse-licking golf club captain. The end of the week, they're all wearing suits, and Trump's giving it fake news and attacking reporters for not reporting what is the truth in this situation when they just asked him simple questions. Now, none of that was not predictable. It's pretty predictable how that sort of thing will go, because you can see from how the virus is spreading and what action people have to take that the US, despite what it's saying, is actually behind the curve a bit on everyone else. And if you don't believe me on that, try explaining to yourself why, if you're a country who needs to socially isolate, you have a group of people stood next door to each other like this, going, oh guys, you've got to self-isolate, you've got to do it now. The reason why they do that is the politic term for it is called donutting. It's to try and make the person, traditionally it came from the idea that you'd have an MP or something sat on a bench and you'd surround them with people to make them look important and to make it look like you were interested in what was going on. That's how it came into use in the UK system. In the States, it's slightly different because they need all those people around Donald. Otherwise, he'll go off on a tangent that no one, including himself, will be able to get himself back from. So they kind of need to have people around him so that they can haul him in, and he needs to have people around him. So when it comes to someone asking him a question that he can't field, he has to put someone else in the loop. And that's understandable. We can all quite easily think of that. Next week, there is going to be, the situation is going to get worse. I've not tried through any of this to scaremonger this, because all the maths, all the science is clearly showing you that we are in for some pretty bad times, and that shock has not yet hit people. It's interesting. I was watching Trump this morning, and the spat almost between him and Anthony Fauci, his doctor, basically, you know, the man of science that's brought in to bring some calm to this. And obviously we've seen with Trump that he's not a science man. He obviously feels he's above that kind of thing. But you know, this had been 2 weeks ago. Fauci would have been sacked for his performance yesterday, because he had to get in to the global communications world and explain that actually the president was making it up, but trying to find a way of saying, well, this new promised wonder drug may be a promised wonder drug, you know. So it was all very complicated in there. Where one question was asked of the president yesterday, in the midst of his tirade about fake news and that's nasty reporting, that next week is going to come back and bite him right in the neck. Okay, and that question is so obvious, because what has happened, it's becoming clear that everyone apart from you and I, everyone in the system knew that they had a much bigger problem than they were letting on. And you've got stuff coming about, well, we knew as early as January. Yesterday it was, oh, we knew a few weeks ago. I think on Thursday someone said, oh, we knew last month. What is interesting is that clearly on the inside of the system, people knew that there were very much bigger problems than was being let on the outside. Now that's fair enough, because you don't really want to, I think the phrase for it is spook the horses. You don't need to just put news out there that terrifies people. You need to find a logical solution and do the best you can to contain what damage you can. And that is why I've been suggesting all the way through the various measures I think the government should take. But the one question that was asked was a bit like the joke on Monty Python's The Funniest Joke in the World, that when people hear it, they die laughing. And this, in a sense, was what this question was about, because it's going to go into the core of how the US system and the US president operate. That question was, strangely enough, about, did a senator have inside information that they use to sell stocks? Now, unlike most of you guys, I've actually been in that hedge fund system. I was a futures broker for a long time. I've been on Learjets with senators, watching how the system works in America. The system works like this. I've got lots of money, I've got lots of influence, I'll get people in who will share in my influence. They will tell me things, I will tell them things, I will do things for them, they will do things for me. Now, I had said all the way through this crisis that what is going on over there is that the price will come down, fueled by the fact that the speculators are short. Now, obviously the news is very, very bad, but what's interesting and is coming out is that insiders into the system knew about this a long way before. And I think one of the reporters there actually asked questions, in fact 2 reporters, asked questions about 3 senators. Trump got very, it really rattled him, because he started going from trying to hold some sensible balance to instantly defending things that he knows are wrong. It's interesting when you watch Trump that he's not very good on the back foot. He can't defend things without attacking. He can't swerve, he can't avoid, and that's a lot to do with the fact that the rhetoric style he uses, he needs positive feedback to get, and when he doesn't get positive feedback, he is unable to accommodate what's going on, and starts to get very irrational, goes off script, can't even remember where he is, starts coming out with this is my favourite. It's nasty. Them very nasty people. He tried to shut down the NBC. This is crazy. The NBC journalist asked him a perfectly reasonable. That's nasty. That's nasty journalism. You know, it's on the back foot. This guy can't operate. And he's been like that all through his presidency. He was like it all through his campaign, but the people fielded against him were of such a lack of visionary politicians that they couldn't see that actually a lot of what he said was good. What you needed to do was get on board with what he was saying that's good and amalgamate that into your policy and then attack him for the bad stuff. No, they then try to bunch it all together, attack him for the bad stuff, and ignore the fact that the elephant in the room is that the politician who says protectionism is a good idea is going to win, and they could have swerved around being better on that, but that's another story. So next week what happens is we go into a conference Monday. Now on Friday the Dow closed down. Everywhere else sort of semi-balanced itself up a bit, but the Dow closed down. Now last week the Dow went down to levels near where it was when Trump got elected, which is what I said was going to happen. It will fall down to those levels, and the reason it is because the speculators, amongst all other sort of things like that, have got a kind of morbid sense of humour, and they love to poke things around. It's like, it's almost like someone laying on the floor, I'm in pain, and you've got these bunch of guys all around the outside pushing you, going, how much pain, how much pain? And there's a kind of humour, a sick humour, in watching how far and fast someone can fall apart. And the markets are particularly good at it. They're particularly good at it because they're full of people with very macabre senses of humour who just do that sort of thing. Yeah, so what will happen is the stock market will come back to the levels where Trump was elected. Now that emotionally is already giving him problems. You've watched. He seemed to be in charge Monday he came out. He just looked off his head. He was he was somewhere else. Tuesday he was like a kid on Ritalin. Wednesday, Thursday, slightly getting the better of it. Friday the wheels are wobbling and starting to come off. Monday when he comes in, the stock market will be down at those levels, and he then is on his back foot. He then has to field the one question that I would ask. I'm one of those guys, people have different talents. People are good at football, people are good at remembering stuff that doesn't need to be remembered, people are good at grovelling, people are good at football, people are good at playing the piano. I'm very good at this. I'm very good at saying, You know that King's new outfit that he's got on? He's naked. No, look, you can see his arse. That just is what I am. It just is somehow or other what I am. On Monday, the price will be down maybe another 5%, because really there just is no good news. Despite the fact Trump keeps trying to invent the idea that there's a new miracle cure out there, which is putting him at odds with his medical advisor, Dr. Fauci. That would normally result in Fauci being sacked. You never know, it may still result in Fauci being sacked. He's trying to offer a hope thing that's based on, well, there is a drug out there that can solve it. It's a Chinese problem, they gave us it. I knew I was right about the borders, let's build a wall with Mexico. He's trying to get this agenda back to all his core issues, which are, there's a lot of, there's a kind of almost like a lot of racial hate in that. But America is a really different place than Donald Trump. It's a lot different place than what's in his head, because although he may have enough people who followed him to get elected, that doesn't mean that that represents the people. It just means it represents the system as it was and the people who voted. So he potentially faces a problem next week of panic and disarray. So the market really can't find any good news, so the market sets back. Gets down to say 16,000 on the Dow or something or other. Now that for him is going to be a right terrifying prospect, because everyone will go, well, Donald Trump's been in and nothing good happened. You know, it happened on my watch. They won't actually be saying that, because they're sensible enough to realise this is a time where panic is not of any good to anyone. But unfortunately for them, the voice inside Donald's head will be saying that, Donald. And he will then become irrational again, as he does. When he gets into trouble, when he's on the back foot, he cannot fight. It's like, I don't know if you've ever done a lot of fighting. I used to like karate and whatever, and brawling and mauling. The really good art of fighting is to watch where your opponent is and then feign one thing and sucker them into it. And he's very transparent at when you push him, where you can get him to. So imagine Monday, Tuesday, the stock market's down. And there's a logical reason why that would be. If you look at all the world stock markets, they've come down X amount. Each one, depending on where it is in the process, comes down. So China comes down, Nikkei comes down, Korea comes down. It goes down further each one that's announces where it is in the stage of the process. So in essence, everyone else has come down more than the States. The idea is that the States is the haven and whatever. That's just a ridiculous concept, because what will happen is everyone will go, oh, it's a bigger problem over there. In fact, it's potentially even bigger, and they will correct down as much as everyone else. So in essence, every stock exchange might say this corrective move is worth, say, 40% on the downside. That would take us down to where Trump was at. And then we've got a predictable guy who has got no defence. He does intellectually, he cannot handle defence moves. He just gets very aggressive. The more aggressive he gets, the more people go, oh fuck, that new suit the King's wearing, it doesn't look as good, does it? So here's the question they're going to ask next week. Donald, did you or anyone in your family or any of your advisors sell their shares before this went on? And it's a really important question, because you can be sure of one thing, and I can be sure of this having worked in the system, that all those hedge fund managers would have been long to the ear holes of people ringing them up, telling them insider information. We've got 3 senators potentially on the hook there. There will be hundreds. There will be people in the CIA, in the medic stuff, all ringing up. Look, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on. These guys would have had the front edge on this, and they would have already unloaded. And you'll see when you get to see who's performing well or whatever. How did they know that this was going on? what went on, who's made the money. Now, when the stock market comes down, which I was trying to talk about last week, you as a pension holder, your pension will go down. When the futures market comes down, for every price it moves, there's always someone makes and someone loses. So how do we find out who knew, when they knew, how they knew? Because they, if you imagine the stock market has lost 35% of its value, the futures index has come down as much as that. Whatever the capitalisation of the futures index would be, the shorts, the people who've sold it, would have made that much money. So this money hasn't actually been lost, it's been transferred around. So those who spread fear, those who had insider information, those who broke the trust that society had put in them, those who are laundering money into the system, they all sell, and then the market collapses, and then you and I and the economy suffer, and these guys make money. And the question will be, were you part of that process? Now, this is where it gets really intriguing, because number one, probably if you were ever to know the answer will 150% be yes, because that's how people like Trump operate. He hasn't shown you his tax returns or whatever. Now, I've been wondering all the way through his presidency, when will someone leak his tax return? Right, and the pressure obviously ramps up a little bit. Next week, if someone asks him that question, did you or any of your family or any of your businesses sell shares because you knew what was going to happen, you will get the most nasty, that's a nasty question. Of course it's a nasty question, and it's a question that people are entitled to answer. But the problem is when they ask it, the market's already just chock full of negative news. There is no news out there that contains things. So the market then starts feeding it on itself, and we go into complete disarray and meltdown. And I've been saying this particularly for about 5 or 6 days here. So what needs to happen, and it still needs to happen, is they need to shut the market. Now, last week I thought Trump was going to do it because he was going to get ahead of the curve, realise what the situation was, and step in and do what needed to be done. The fact that he didn't will be read by other people to say maybe he was still short. Maybe he had actually sold the shares and was running short. Maybe his family was short. Maybe his business was short. And even if that story isn't true, it's just got so much traction that it drives the market. And what happens when we get into that situation where we're down below where Trump was and everyone's panicking, is that the panic starts to spread not within the market but outside the market, which is the one thing that you really have to be aware of. Because if the people of New York think, oh shit, we're in shutdown here, and the president's been short shares and knew all along, they take to the streets. We're still having to pay rent. We're still having to do this. We haven't got any food. We're blah, 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 blah. We've got guns. Let's get out there. That is the scenario you get into, and you get into it fairly quickly. So then you end up with Trump needs to get in the market and shut the markets. So that's the kind of process. George Soros, most of you know of him. He calls this a reflexive loop, and it's a really interesting concept that the markets really everyone buys into. It's that you start doing something, and the fact that you're doing something starts you doing something, and that starts you believing something, and that starts you believing that what you believe is whatever, and then the price reflects what you believe, and then that backs up what you believe, and it all starts to tumble in on itself. That's what happens when you get fear going, and you need then to operate in a different way. So that's what I think will happen next week. They still need to shut the markets. They need to do this. They need to shut the stock exchange, the futures exchange. They need to stop the charging of all interest. if you just suspend the idea that interest needs to be paid, the government doesn't need to go out and borrow money to pay interest. Do you understand what I'm trying to say there? If the government doesn't need to go in and give you money to pay your rent, it doesn't need to make the situation worse. If you just say all rent, all interest is suspended, then it calms the situation down. So you shut the stock market down, you shut the futures market down, you shut the futures markets down in bonds and interest rate contracts, because you do not want speculators standing on the edge, poking to see how much this hurts, driving the cost of borrowing up through the roof in a time of emergency. I've said this is what's going to happen. It is what's happening. Okay, you shut the commodity markets because yesterday's announcement about Canada and Mexico, which was really Trump trying to say, well, I was right all along, I should have shut the borders down, this wouldn't have happened if we had a wall, that'll be his next defence. We'll throw into the market the idea that there will be shortages of agricultural workers. So we will start to see the agricultural markets getting cornered. Remember what I said yesterday about the bag of potatoes? It went up 75% last week. Okay, so you need to shut the futures market down. There was one more thing I was going to say, and I've completely forgot what it is. This isn't scripted, I'll just make it up as I go along. Matthew, watching this in the Channel Islands, I do hope these little lessons on how economics and markets work are what you asked me for last week. Okay. Bye.